When most people think of a trust, they imagine old money, sprawling estates, or maybe those dramatic reading of the will scenes in movies where everyone is fighting over the silver.
Oh, absolutely. It feels like a world reserved for the ultra wealthy. But in the legal world, specifically when you're staring down a bar exam essay, trusts are really just architectural diagrams. They're structures. And sometimes those structures are built on shaky ground.
That's a great way to put it. And today we are looking at a perfect storm of a case study. We've got a settler, that's the guy creating the trust, who tries to do everything at once: set up a legacy, cut out an heir, and hide his money from a lawsuit.
The classic have your cake and eat it too scenario.
Exactly. But the question is, did he pull it off? We're looking at three distinct battles here. First, was his trust even real? Second, can a relative leave money to that trust if it was empty at the time? And third, and this is the juicy one, can he use that trust to stiff a victim who sued him for 75 grand?
It's a fascinating mess. It touches on the core philosophy of property law: intent versus reality, and fairness versus formality.
So let's start at the beginning. 7 years ago, our protagonist, the settler, announces he's making the Settler's Family Trust. He names himself trustee, names a beneficiary, Dawn, and says he wants to keep the income for himself. Standard stuff, right?
Textbook. He's ticking all the boxes for creating a valid trust. You need intent, you need a trustee, you need a beneficiary. He did all that.
But here's the catch. He didn't put a dime in it. For 3 whole years, it was just a piece of paper, an empty box.
Right. And this is where students often trip up. They think, no money, no trust. And technically, they're right at that specific moment in time. A trust without property, what lawyers call the res, is just a phantom. It doesn't exist yet.
So if he had died in those first 3 years, the trust would have been a failure?
Completely. It would have been a nullity. But, and this is the big but, he didn't die then. 4 years ago, he sold some stock and dropped $100,000 into a bank account named for the trust.
He finally put the toy in the box.
Exactly. And the law is actually pretty pragmatic here. It says, okay, you built the engine 3 years ago, but you only poured the gas in today. The moment he deposited that money, the engine roared to life. The trust became valid the second it was funded.
So the argument that it was invalid because it started empty doesn't hold water?
Not at all, it's a cure. The funding cured the defect. So, for our first hurdle, the settler's family trust is valid. Dawn, the beneficiary, can breathe a sigh of relief.
Okay, so the box is built and it has some money in it. Now enters the second character, the in-law.
The generous in-law.
Right. So 5 years ago, back when the trust was still just an empty phantom, this in-law writes a will, and in that will she leaves her entire estate to the settler's family trust.
This is what we call a pour-over provision. Imagine her will is a bucket, and she's tipping it over to pour everything into the trust.
But wait, at the time she wrote that will, the trust was empty. It didn't legally exist yet, based on what you just said. So, we have a character named Bill, let's call him the jealous heir, who steps in. Bill says, hey, you can't leave money to a ghost. The trust was fake when she signed the will, so her money should come to me instead.
Bill is making a very logical argument. If I leave money to a corporation that doesn't exist, the gift fails. So why is a trust different?
Why is it different?
Because of the pour-over statutes. The law loves efficiency. The rule generally says that as long as the trust instrument, the paperwork, the terms, the intent existed when the will was signed, it's fine. It doesn't matter that the trust was unfunded and technically empty at that moment.
So, the law validates the destination, even if the destination wasn't fully open for business yet.
Precisely. Think of it like mailing a letter to a house that's still under construction. As long as the address is registered, the mailman knows where to go. By the time the in-law died and the mail was delivered, the house was finished. The trust was funded.
So Bill, the intestate heir, gets nothing?
Bill gets zero. The in-law's estate pours perfectly into the trust. The court looks at the timeline. Paperwork existed, then will was signed, then trust was funded, then in-law died. That chain is unbroken in the eyes of the law.
Poor Bill. But honestly, I'm more worried about the next character. Let's talk about the victim.
Ah, yes, the tort judgment. This is where the rubber meets the road.
So, the settler, the guy who made this trust, got sued. Maybe he caused a car accident, Maybe it was negligence, we don't know, but a court said he owes a victim $75,000.
A significant sum.
The settler says, too bad, so sad. My money is in the trust, and the trust has a spendthrift clause. You can't touch it.
This is a bold move. Let's clarify what a spendthrift clause is for our listeners. Usually, if I set up a trust for you, I can put in a rule that says your creditors can't garnish the money before you get it. I'm protecting my gift to you from your bad financial decisions.
That sounds reasonable. It's my money. I can put strings on it.
Exactly. But here, the settler didn't set this up for a reckless child. He set it up for himself. Remember the facts? He retained the right to receive income and principal for his own support.
So he locked his money in a safe, kept the key in his pocket, and is telling the victim, sorry, I can't open the safe.
That is the perfect analogy. And the law absolutely hates that. It's called a self-settled trust. Public policy is very clear. You cannot build a shield around your own assets to hide from your own creditors, while you still enjoy the benefit of those assets.
It does seem incredibly unfair if you could just declare yourself judgment-proof by moving money from your left pocket to your right pocket.
It would destroy the credit system. If that were allowed, every person in debt would just draft a trust deed, move their cash, and laugh at the bank. The rule is strictly applied. If you are the settler and also a beneficiary, your creditors can reach the maximum amount that the trustee could distribute to you.
And since he can receive principal and income,
The creditors can reach everything. The shield of the spendthrift clause evaporates. It's useless.
so the victim can go straight to First Bank and seize that account?
Absolutely. The $75,000 judgment will be paid out of the trust assets. The settler's clever attempt to ring-fence his wealth fails completely because he couldn't let go of the control. He wanted the protection of a trust, but the access of a personal bank account.
It's interesting, isn't it? In the first two scenarios, the validity and the will, the law was very forgiving. It overlooked the empty box issue. It overlooked the timing issue with the will. But with the creditor,
The law draws a hard line. And I think that speaks to the social contract behind these laws. The courts are willing to be flexible to ensure a person's wishes are honored regarding who gets their money when they die. That's the validity and pour-over part. We want to facilitate inheritance.
right?
But the courts are not willing to be flexible when it comes to dodging responsibility. The creditor access part is about accountability. You can't use legal forms to harm a third party who has a legitimate claim against you.
So if we look at the scorecard for this case study, the trust is valid, so the structure stands. The will is valid, so the money flows in. But the shield is broken, so the victim gets paid.
That's the verdict. And for anyone studying for the bar or just interested in how wealth works, the lesson is clear. Trusts are powerful, but they aren't magic wands. You can't use them to cheat the system, especially when you're the one holding the strings.
It makes you wonder about the future of asset protection. We see so many offshore trusts and complex structures now. Do you think this self-settled rule will ever crack? Or will states start competing to let people hide their money better?
That's the billion-dollar question. Some states are already experimenting with domestic asset protection trusts that try to erode this rule. They're trying to attract capital by promising that safe you mentioned earlier. But for now, under general common law and the UBE standards, if you hold the keys, the creditor can kick down the door.
A comforting thought for justice, perhaps less so for the paranoid billionaire.
Laughs. Indeed, justice usually finds a way to follow the money.
We'll leave it there, a complex web of empty boxes, funnels, and broken shields, all unraveled in 10 minutes. Thanks for breaking it down with me.
My pleasure. Always read the fine print.
See you next time.